Hello, everyone. This is Outnumbered. I'm Emily Campagno, here with my co-host, Harris Faulkner, and also joining us today, Kennedy, Morgan Ortagus, and Rob Smith. Now, the mainstream media's reaction to the Twitter files is just stunning, and yet not surprising. Elon Musk has released chilling information about the inner workings of the social media giant, including the silencing of conservatives and medical professionals and censoring the Hunter Biden laptop story and criticism of President Biden's botched Afghanistan withdrawal. But the media is just shrugging it all off. In fact, the big three networks devoted 0 minutes to the Twitter files. The New York Post's Miranda Devine calls it shameful. And she's also taking aim at the New York Times and the Washington Post, writing, "Every morning, these august organs set the narrative for newsrooms across the country. And yet, time and again, we see them ignore the stories that don't suit their own agenda as propaganda purveyors for the Democratic Party and the security state. This has been obvious in their non-coverage of Elon Musk's Twitter files, 4 batches over 10 days so far, which have revealed a chilling censorship regime at the social media giant, which no doubt is replicated across big tech, including at Facebook and Google." Rob, as she goes on to say, it's frankly a wartime tactic, which is death by silence.
No, absolutely. This is absolutely a stunning sort of, I like to call it fake news by omission, right? So they're literally omitting things so that people don't know it. But I want to make the point right now that the mainstream media is not as powerful in 2022 as they were in, say, 2012. So myself, like, I'm a trained journalist, but I also do content creation, right? And so I want to note the entire infrastructure of people who go to a lot of different media sources from people like they trust, like me, that they find online, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, et cetera, et cetera. So I would like to say that even though it is absolutely shameful that these media organizations are ignoring this, I'm actually thankful that there is a bigger new media infrastructure out there. And the one last point that I want to make about this is that a lot of people criticize the Twitter files, saying that they were dumped on a sort of off news cycle moment. But Elon Musk doesn't believe in the typical news cycle, which is why some of this stuff came out Saturday night, Friday night, on the weekends. So what we're in right now is a new media era where we are consuming this stuff all the time. So these people have a lot of power, but their power dissipates every single year, and that makes me hopeful for the future.
Oh, gosh, I wish I had that hope. I do have a lot of faith, and it
Yes.
does still move mountains. And at the same time, I know that hope is not a strategy, prayer is. So I'm going to pray that people do find this information in other places and that they're hungry for it. The problem is the legacy media and the liberal outlets have existed for so long that they take up all the ad space, and they funnel you into certain places to go to get certain information, and they don't have to work that hard to do it. So if it means that they can sit down and be a little bit more, complacent about things, there's an understanding about that. People are automatically going to say on the left that they believe them before they believe us, even though we shout from the wind with more facts than anybody can ignore. What Elon Musk is doing, though, is he's giving a platform for everybody to talk.
Yes.
So when I hear silence from certain media outlets that say that they print all the news that fits on the page and they do all that kind of stuff and they're so good and they've named themselves after the alphabet ABC
And democracy
all that
dies
kind
in
of stuff.
darkness.
Right, democracy dies in
darkness.
When I hear all of that and then they're silent, I think, well, what do the Twitter files have with their names? Well, what's coming? And you mentioned some of the other, perhaps, complicity. I want to know if the blacklists and the search lists and some of those things were not sold to other media arms and platforms. And was Facebook doing something very similar, and they didn't even have to work hard to figure out who ought to be on that list because maybe they share these lists. That's not conspiratorial. That's based on the evidence that now we're reading it and we're seeing how damaging it can really be, and certain folk are silent.
That's right. And Kennedy, I think, to Rob's original point, because I totally agree with everything you guys are saying, there's those in the left-wing media and the mainstream media who have that small stronghold, albeit eroding, but who continue in their silence and to disregard what's coming out. For example, a famed journalist replying with a yawn to this. But what is there to yawn about the complicity between security state and our government and those who are sort of traversing between big tech and those agencies continuing to suppress American voices, continuing to impact the elections, and now it somehow is just cause for disregard.
Yeah, and you're talking about Ben Collins, the misinformation czar, who replied with the yawn emoji. It's like, you better wake up, because you have federal government employees from the FBI, DHS, CIA working with a giant social media company, and they're funneling information and they are directing the narrative. You should wake up to that. That should not be boring, because this is incredibly problematic, because, maybe your side was the one who got the boost from Twitter working with federal law enforcement. Maybe that happened this time. Next time, you may not be so lucky. So you better wake up to new systems that have accountability for everyone. And I have a slightly different take on why the New York Times and the Washington Post may be silent. They may be silent because perhaps they were fed directives from the CIA, the FBI, and DHS during the 2020 campaign. Maybe they don't want to be totally hypocritical condemning this stuff, because maybe they were engaged in the exact same thing.
That's what the point I was making.
Yeah,
you made it better.
Which means there's liability potentially for them too. And to Kennedy's prior point before that, Morgan, I mean, Larry Elder, as he pointed out, Musk spent $44 billion to do what WAPO, the New York Times, and the ACLU used to do before they became public relations bureaus for the left, which is defend free speech. So now the pendulum has simply swung in their favor. What happens if it swings the other way to them?
I love what you guys said, and I think a lot of this has to do with who has power and who has control. And so much of the left is used to having power and control over the media, what's proliferated. You mentioned this, Rob. It made me think of a couple stories. One, when I was State Department spokesperson in the last administration, we had legacy media seats on the plane. Those seats belonged to the Secretary of State. I opened up 2 seats to start getting new voices, new people in. I brought Guy Benson on one of them. Katie Pavlich came on one. Adam Credo from the Free Beacon. I wanted to bring in new voices to cover foreign policy, because we only had legacy media institutions doing it. You would have thought that I touched the third rail.
You did.
I touched the third rail by opening up 2 seats. I also, as State Department spokesperson, Emily, had a conversation with Twitter, and I said, I just want to understand why the Ayatollah, who chants death to Israel, death to Jews, and not just the Ayatollah, but many figures like him, explain to me why these people still have accounts and voices on Twitter. And I got a lot of non-speak. I never got a real answer. But again, I think without the progressive censors, the left is losing their mind, and that's why you're not seeing the coverage, in my opinion.
I had on Senator Lindsey Graham last hour, and we were going to talk about a whole host of things, and we did. But one that I didn't see coming was what he's planning, along with Elizabeth Warren. He said that this issue needs Democrats on it. So you saw Ro Khanna talking about it. He said it's imperative that we attack this together and put in, according to Lindsey Graham, a regulatory commission for this, because of the tentacles that it has, both politics, free speech, to our children, so on and so forth. And I said, but you're a Republican. That sounds like more government. And he said, no, it's targeted government. They have Section 230 right now. They don't deserve it. Now, they've talked a lot. You and I have had this conversation many times. When are they going to take that away? So we'll see in January if Republicans and Democrats will have enough. He seems to think they do, power now and influence in the Senate, to take away the 230, Section 230, the protection, the ability for these companies not to be regulated. I tell you, if that happens, there could be some whistleblowers out there.
And Rob, I love the idea of that. My one fear, however, is that the tentacles of donorship and lobbying and impact and influence go so far back with the Democratic Party. So I hope, if it is as surgical as Senator Lindsey Graham opines and hopes, I'm all for it. But let's see who the largest donors were to, for example, Kamala Harris, which have been largely big tech. What about the greatest lobbyists of the administration under the Obama years, for example? Google, by dozens. So there's so much influence and impact that big tech has had on individual elected officials. And I worry about anyone who is in a decision-making seat that has influence in that way.
I wanted to make one point, jumping off what you said, because that was brilliant work that you were doing to sort of open it up, right? And so there's something that Ron DeSantis is doing down in Florida, which I think that is interesting, is that he's being criticized for not talking to quote unquote mainstream media platforms, and he's giving more of a voice to local outlets. And so he's being criticized by that. And I think that what you are doing, Morgan, what DeSantis is doing down there is a model for what people in actual power can do to sort of elevate these new media voices and to take the power away from the mainstream media platform.
Well, to DeSantis' credit, though, he is doing both. He went on The View, and I mean, what a bottom of the birdcage mess that was with those ladies. Like, I don't know what they were doing.
I had a similar experience.
Great. Hey everyone, I'm Emily Compagno. Catch me and my co-hosts Harris Faulkner and Kaylee McEnany on Outnumbered every weekday at 12 p.m. Eastern, or set your DVR. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page for daily highlights.